In today's landscape, video games are widely considered to be an art form, and that's why good games are often described with words like masterpiece or labor of love. Following this train of thought, people who create video games should be considered artists, right? Well, yes, but those creative skills don't always translate well to the visual marketing aspect of the industry. We human beings tend to be rather shallow, and we generally like eye-catching covers to persuade us to sink our hard-earned cash into a game, so it's really important for titles to stand out with memorable box art. Unfortunately, memorable isn't always pretty, and sometimes video game box art gets downright weird. Some games are given deliberately weird cover art, some fall victim to odd marketing tactics, and others just give the impression that the publisher simply didn't care about the presentation of the game. No matter the reason though, we gamers have had to put up with some very peculiar video game boxes over the years. So put on your most pretentious hat and prepare to judge some artwork, because I'm Ben from TripleJump, and here are the 10 weirdest video game box arts of all time. Number 10. Petz Monkey Madness. Weirdness isn't always about abstract ideas or random inclusions. Sometimes weirdness comes from taking an unorthodox and difficult to understand approach, and this is certainly the case with Petz Monkey Madness's box art. Released for the Nintendo Wii in 2009, Petz Monkey Madness, or Crazy Monkeys if you want to get American about this, was created as part of Ubisoft's Petz franchise and tasked players with caring for, shockingly, a monkey. Perhaps the craziest aspect of Monkey Madness is that it landed on shelves in the UK with a decidedly busy and unimpressive front cover, with no less than 9 stock images of various simian species superimposed onto a plain white background. Monkey Madness's box art looks as though it was cobbled together by a teenager on the school computer. The US cover wasn't much better either. It showed a different team of stock image monkeys destroying what looks like a child's bedroom. As well as looking awful, Monkey Madness's cover doesn't really tell the consumer anything about the game, it just shows people pointing Wiimotes at confused chimps. Arguably, this would have been a better experience for players because the actual game tasks them with nothing more than dressing their monkey in various questionable outfits whilst TVs play the Monkey Madness trailer on a loop. Basically, the game is as balmy as its box art. Number 9. Snow White and the 7 Clever Boys. Not only does it have a vaguely disturbing title, but Snow White and the 7 Clever Boys was released with a truly hideous cover. You don't need to look at the title's box art for long to know that it's one of the most cursed images ever printed onto a video game, but it's only when you get into the actual gameplay you realize just how weird the use of a haunting CGI-rendered Snow White and her clever boys truly is. Snow White and the 7 Clever Boys is an incredibly simplistic puzzle game. Only ever released in Europe, it features trying tasks such as colouring and the completion of virtual jigsaws. Perhaps the strangest part, though, is that the game itself features no actual dwarves. The title does imply this, but the chaps on the cover look far more like diminutive Disney characters than they do those in the game, so it's more than a little bizarre. What Snow White and the 7 Clever Boys does have, however, is a highly offensive cutscene that introduces the boys themselves and that we feel we can't just gloss over. With hand-drawn characters animated into computer-generated environments, this cutscene manages to avoid using the term dwarf, but instead body-shames children and includes a flagrantly offensive racial stereotype. Not so clever after all, then. Number 8. Mega Man. Even legends have to start somewhere, and Mega Man is no exception. Before he became a video game icon, he got his start in 1987's simply titled Mega Man, a variation of the standard run-and-gun formula that was exceedingly popular at the time. It was Capcom's first game developed specifically for home consoles, and maybe that's why they had a little trouble with the game's box art. Though Mega Man's simplistic cartoon design is well recognized today, it wasn't featured on the game's cover. Instead, the original box for the US release featured an unnecessarily realistic rendering of the hero, complete with a detailed human face and a weirdly proportioned body. With arms as wide as his torso, this twisting caricature of Mega Man can be seen squatting awkwardly as though he's riding an invisible motorcycle. He's also clutching a handgun, because apparently this Mega Man needed to look as different as possible from the actual character. The game itself was a success and spawned the franchise, which has ensured Mega Man's lasting popularity. However, there's absolutely nothing on the original US box art that even remotely matches up to the game contained within. Instead, it offers up nothing more than a strange and poorly drawn approximation of the now iconic character. Number 7. Cheggers Party Quiz. We're not sure why developers keep sticking C-list British TV celebrities in video games, because they don't exactly have widespread appeal, even if the titles do make for top quality content. That might just be why Cheggers Party Quiz faded into obscurity almost immediately upon its release. Well, that and it's ultimately just a poorly cobbled together quiz game. Though the gameplay is virtually non-existent and thoroughly unremarkable, Cheggers Party Quiz stands out for one key reason. It has some uniquely strange box art. Now, with the express endorsement of a celebrity like Keith Chegwin, it would be a pretty safe bet that Cheggers Party Quiz would have the man himself on the cover, and it does. In a manner of speaking, it's just a horrible rendering with perpetually flushed cheeks and a face that manages to be both bulbous and frighteningly angular. Well done. To make matters worse, the Cheggers avatar appears regularly during gameplay, offering players a little of Keith Chegwin's presumably improvised comedic wisdom. Though the cover may not be too weird at a glance, the idea that somebody decided to conceive of a nightmarish animated Cheggers instead of just, snapping a photo of the man himself is super disturbing, really. Rest in peace, Cheggers. Number 6. Super Buster Move. Now, I'm no expert, but I'd imagine that a key element of marketing anything is knowing your target audience. Though it's not clear exactly what the designer of Super Buster Move's PS2 box art was thinking, it almost certainly wasn't anything to do with the game's ideal player base. Seriously, who is a cover featuring a close-up of a baby's face complete with sunglasses and bubblegum supposed to appeal to? There is at least some reference to the game on display, though. Reflected in the baby's glasses is a still of Super Buster Move's gameplay, letting players know that it's a colourful matching bubble-popping extravaganza. The bubblegum the baby is apparently chewing also seems to reference this, even if it does mean that I'm now legally required to tell you not to give babies any type of gum, okay? The problem with marketing your game with a baby's face is that it sends a confusing message. Is the game for babies? Does it feature a baby as part of its story in some way? Are the sunglasses relevant to anything? The answer to all of these questions seems to be a resounding no, which ultimately serves to make Super Buster Move's cover even stranger. Number 5. Carnage Rally. Released exclusively for the Game Boy Advance, Carnage Rally is known mostly for its infamously weird box art. The game itself is of the top-down vehicular combat persuasion and was well received by critics, but its frightening cover art was ultimately the reason it went down in history. It has a checkered flag for a background and a blurred vehicle jutting into view, but the real kicker is the blue-haired man leaning across the box. There's no explanation for why he's there, and he appears to be in significant distress. The disturbing face on Carnage Rally's cover isn't the only one, though. Booting up the game allows players to choose their in-game avatar, many of which are equally horrifying. Only after deciding on which unsettling visage is going to represent your experience are you allowed to play Carnage Rally, and even then, you're forced to look at it semi-regularly throughout the game. We're not sure what went on behind the scenes during the design process for Carnage Rally's box art, but it seems likely that the brief that the artist received just said, "Create some nightmare fuel." It's almost as though the cover was designed to warn people away from the title, because it's hard to imagine that anyone would look at such a disturbing image and still opt to spend actual money on the game inside. Number 4. Skateboard Joust. Combining one brutal medieval sport with a totally radical modern one, Skateboard Joust is exactly the sort of out-of-the-box thinking that the world needs. Released in 1988 for the Amstrad CPC, Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum, Skateboard Joust hit shelves with some truly tubular box art. With a leather-clad punk riding a rocket skateboard through the air in pursuit of a human-sized man-bat, the sheer insanity of the artwork implies that the game is equally unique. Unfortunately, the actual gameplay that Skateboard Joust has to offer is far less exciting. Players control a skateboarder who, for some reason, seems to be pursued by Daleks, and they must ride around the screen avoiding capture. Sadly, there doesn't seem to be any jousting going on at all, meaning that the game is at least half built on a lie. There are other factors that make Skateboard Joust's cover even weirder. There's the fact that the word death is printed on the rocket board and that the bat creature is fleeing in terror. Combined, these two details suggest that the Skateboard Joust punk could be the fourth horseman of the apocalypse, aka Death. Then again, maybe it was all just a hollow marketing ploy to sell an underwhelming game. Either way, it's very strange. Number 3. Dangerous Streets. The late 1980s saw the rise of the fighting game, with titles like Street Fighter and Double Dragon pioneering the genre. Predictably, the early 1990s saw the rise of cheap imitations of successful fighting games, and it's into that bracket that Dangerous Streets fits neatly. Released for the Amiga, Dangerous Streets is continually listed amongst the worst games ever made, but it does also boast another unfortunately memorable trait: it has some of the weirdest box art ever. Perhaps the most eye-catching element of Dangerous Street's cover are the well-shined buttocks of a scantily clad woman who remembered her arm-length gloves and thigh-high boots, but forgot to put any actual clothes on. Then there's the deeply concerning crotch bulge of a lightning-wielding alley fighter. The box art is topped off by the gaping mouth of an unconscious man and what appears to be a goblin lurking in the background. The game itself is thoroughly underwhelming and tasks players with controlling poorly animated fighters using what critics described as random, jerky attacks that make no sense. It seems that Dangerous Streets is an experience that's better avoided, but really, the game's frighteningly bizarre box art should have warned us away in the first place. Number 2. Buster Move 2 Arcade Edition. Not only does Buster Move 2 Arcade Edition make the franchise a repeat weird box art offender, but it also features perhaps one of the most notoriously disturbing and nonsensical video game covers of all time. A bubble-popping puzzle game originally made for arcades under the name Puzzle Bobble 2, it was then converted for home consoles. However, the North American version of the game was released with some truly horrifying box art. Yay! The game's cover shows large blue balls with human faces trapped inside, seemingly moaning in pain with their eyes propped open. The words, "so addictive it should be illegal," round off the peculiar and unsettling imagery by making it seem even more sinister. Pretty awful, considering that Buster Move 2 was largely marketed as a game for young children. Supposedly, the terrifying box art was originally a print ad that the North American marketing department mistakenly used as the game's main cover art. Somehow this makes the situation even worse. Not only is the frightening image strikingly at odds with the game's colourful aesthetic, but it should never have been used in the first place. Buster Move 2's cover art remains one of the weirdest and most disturbing things ever printed on a video game, which is certainly quite the accolade. But that said, still not quite as odd as number 1. Phalanx. In practically every sense of the word, Phalanx is entirely unremarkable. That is, as a game at least, because it stands out for just one incredibly ridiculous reason. It boasts the weirdest video game box art of all time. Despite being a fairly simplistic space shooter for the SNES that generally failed to impress critics, Phalanx is still remembered decades after its 1991 release, and all because of its cover. While it does feature a speeding space vessel, this item of relevance is relegated to the background. Instead, an elderly bearded man in overalls sits front and center, plucking away at his banjo with an expression of mingled disinterest and confusion. He's not the only one that's utterly flummoxed here, let me tell you. His disinterest is at least fitting, because Phalanx's gameplay was dismissed as unoriginal, and his confusion was, ultimately, exactly the point. The game's marketing department admitted to including the bushy bearded banjo player simply to trick players into thinking Phalanx might be a more interesting title than it actually was. Using deliberately jarring and entirely unrelated imagery as a marketing tactic is either incredibly stupid or a stroke of genius depending on who you ask. Either way, it worked in a sense because Phalanx has gone down in history, if only because its box art is really, really weird.